Oh.
Greetings, brothers. Please come gather by the fire. Gather by the fire with brothers. We are moving into the late afternoon, evening hours. We welcome you back. We know that we've had a full day, an early morning for those in the West. And we'll have a later evening for those of us in the East. We welcome all of you. I just want to take a minute to set the stage for our evening together. And also to invite you to turn your videos off as our speakers are able to see us and take the primary spots on our screens. Also, always invite you to always stay muted. We will control that pretty closely, but we will have an opportunity later this evening for you to engage with Father Richard and Jim Clarke and Belden Lane through our chat function. So I wanted to make sure that everybody realizes, if you notice quickly on the bottom of your screen, there's an opportunity to chat. And the way that we're going to do the question and response period later on is that you will chat a question and you'll see there's one of our brothers. His name is Questions. Questions for Richard is the question. So make sure and chat your questions there so that we can make sure and share those with Jim Clarke as he leads the discussion this evening. And it is going to be a conversation. We're going to do that conversation in about 25 minutes, plus or minus, and then we'll end with a blessing and a dream weaver prompt for us to go out. But before we get to that point, as many of you know, when we have our Saturday night gathering in person in Oracle, we always want to provide an update on Illumine and what we've been doing and where we are and where we're going and ways in which you can engage with us. And we do not want to leave that practice behind, because this is a brotherhood of men that rely on each other to do the inner work that makes a difference in the world. So without further ado, I do want to turn that over to Steve Hicken, our current Illumine president, to offer an Illumine update, and then he'll pass it on to Jim Clarke for the conversation with Jim and Richard Rohr and Belden Lane. So with that, Steve, the floor is yours. I pass the talking stick. Thank you, brothers.
Talking stick received. Thank you. And as Brad mentioned, this is a session when we have longer time together. We're able to go a little bit more in depth. So I'm going to be lean of speech, but hoping that each word carries what it needs to say. I'd like to talk to three different points. One, resilience. The second, I want to give you some headliners on our financial reality. And the third piece, I do want to talk about ways you can contribute. When I get to that, I'm going to use this headlamp and you'll see why. I got into fundraising when I worked for the Maryknoll Fathers and Brothers. And on my very first donor visit, I visited a couple in Spokane, Washington. And I chose to go to Spokane, Washington because I went to school at Gonzaga and I could see my friends as well as do some work. And there was a couple on one of those computer spread, computer printout sheets. If you remember, there were green and white bars, and it was a dot matrix printer, and it would go on for pages. There was a couple there that had been giving $40 a month for something like 25 or 30 years. And I asked, I said, do anybody know these folks? Nobody knew them. So I thought, okay, well, they're going to be the first on my visit. So there I was in my late 20s, arriving, you know, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed in a job I knew nothing about. And these were the very first donors I visited on my very first visit. And I knew from their address that they lived up on the hillside out in the wheat fields, you know, because I'd lived in Spokane for a while. So I found my way out to, you know, an intersection, another intersection. I stopped at this greasy diner and had a meal. And I said, do you know where these folks live? And they said, oh yeah, you go out to the dirt road by the rock, and then you take a right-hand turn, and then you'll see the house up on the hillside. So I did that. Drove up to the house. American Gothic is waiting for me, just like in the, you know, the suspenders, practically the pitchfork in their, because they saw me coming, you know, for miles away. And they received me and sit me down in like big, deep, poofy chairs with elk heads and bison and, you know, all around. We had a nice conversation. Oh, and they served me ice cream and apple pie. I just had this giant, you know, so it's like, thank you very much. So we get to talking, and I thanked him very much. And I said, so how did you get started with this? And so they became very quiet, the two of them. And they looked at each other and said, well, 25 years ago, a Maryknoll priest came to do a presentation at one of our masses. And what they didn't know is that our daughter, Madeline, had recently been diagnosed with a fatal blood disease. And the doctors had said that she had about 6 months to live. She was 18 at the time. And Father said, well, if you sign up to be a monthly sponsor with Maryknoll, we'll pray for your intentions. So they decided, okay, we'll do that. So they signed up and they became monthly sponsors. It was Maryknoll term for the time. And they said, over the years, it turned out that our daughter lived not 6 months. She lived until she was her early 40s. And got married. We had 2 kids. We have 2 grandchildren. And then the blood disease took her life. So Mr. Hicken, they called me at the time, when we send you that monthly check, we just want you to know that's Madeline's life that comes along with that. And gives me shivers each time I tell that story. And I learned this exchange of funds, money, whatever, it has so many layers to it. So, you know, that was a gift. That was a gift to me in a sense. This is a service, it's an opportunity. And that color, I just want to share that because that's the spirit with which I sit with you. And every time I think about raising funds, Madeline comes to mind. Couple of things I mentioned earlier that you know, in with all that's happening with COVID and all the things we cannot do, at the same time, I developed a list. I just started jotting down here. I jotted down all of the things that I could think of that I knew of that were happening, and there's many more that Illumin men are simply just stepping in and doing. Not that it's in an organized way, not that there's any strategic plan. It's just sprouting out from us. Our chapters meet however they can. Virtual council is meeting. We're connecting with brothers in many countries, and many of them are here with us now. Our links to Latin America are growing, and I just learned actually there's a monthly gathering of men from Latin America, including Brazil, Peru, Salvador, Guatemala, Mexico, and I'm sure some others as well. Latvian brothers have reached out to us, and while we've been slow and sluggish to respond, they keep coming back and they're saying, when are you guys going to help? We please step up. And so we're working on that. And
They're very good, Steve.
For next August there. We're building our partnerships with the Mankind Project, with the Crucible Project, and Jerry in particular, and I'm sure there's others as well. We're in active conversations with them. I learned we have 50 men working now, participating in our cohorts that many of us here are gathering. These are cohorts to discern over 12 months time what's yours to do. The title of this program is Howling at the Moon. Love the name. Our men of color, which started to meet 4 or 5 years ago, continue to meet in council. And in addition, and this will come up a little bit later, there's another council called the Council of Radical Belonging, which is working to generate the change processes across Illumin to build the diversity that we know we need in order to fulfill our mission. It sounds like a lot, doesn't it? I mean, but there's more. It's like, you know, how it says, but there's more. So we've also initiated a process in a very intentional way. It's last April, but even starts earlier, to reimagine what the kind of organization needs to be that will support us all in moving forward this beautiful promise of the world and the masculinity that we're trying to bring about. So we call it the reweaving process. It's actually a beautiful name. Our liberty and justice program and the education, which leads us through an understanding of racism, how it's in our bones and how it's in our structures, that's also underway. Several of our men here went to Ireland not so long ago to help Irish men pull together an NMROP, and we're experiencing the energy that comes from that. And finally, I'll just say that we've, in the hopes that we can get together face to face, next year we have 7 in-person MROP scheduled. So we're hoping and praying that can happen. All of this during this time of COVID. It's really pretty astonishing. And all of it by us. We're in it. We're all doing this together through our own initiatives. And I wanted to just recognize that. In terms of our financial reality, and this is, you know, as men, we get together, we need to talk about money, sex, and power, you know, so this is the financial side. Okay. In years past, we've had a PowerPoint presentation, and we'll walk everybody through the figures on that. What we decided to do this year, in honor of the time that we have, Roland, our treasurer, will develop about a 10-minute video recorded presentation, and in about 2 weeks, we'll send you a link to that so that will be recorded and be available. The top line, though, just so you know, is our budget's roughly $180,000 this year of expenses. Nearly all of that goes to fund men working like Brad, our development associate, John French, the consultants, the way our open circle consultants. That's about 80% of our budget. Our budget that we have, our money really goes to sustain and communicate among ourselves, to communicate to the world through our website. We don't own property, we don't own stuff. I mean, it's just really to, in a sense, grease the skids of the initiatives that we're all putting forward. I'm not going to walk through the exact figures, but I just wanted you to know, what's the money for? What does Illumin use the money for? That's what the money is used for. And I'll simply say too, the reason why we hire people, we do everything we can to ask for and employ all of the volunteer time and energy and expertise that we can find to do the work that we do. That's always the first call. There are times, though, that the intensity of the work that needs to happen, or the continuity of it, or sometimes the technical expertise does require us to pay people to do things. That's not our first and only call. In fact, our greatest treasure is us right here, and the men who are with us, but not present at this gathering. So that's really what we use. That's, you know, the question is, what is our funding for? That's how we use it. Look forward to, in fact, I'll be interviewing Roland. We'll send you the video or the link to that. Finally, this is where I get to put this on. I'm going to invite you a headlamp. Okay. Very quickly, my sons and I went on a backpacking trip about 5 years ago. Some of you have heard this story. We got up at 3 a.m, really early. It was dark because we wanted to hike up a pass and have hot chocolate at the top and receive the sunrise coming in. When we left the camp early that morning, the trail goes across just barren rocks and giant boulders, and you get lost. And the only way you can find the way is through those cairns. Those, you know, people have stacked rocks on top of rocks. Well, you can't see those things nighttime, you know? So there we go. Of course, we get lost, and it's that sort of inky, velvety feeling of the darkness and stillness of night, where when a voice comes out, it's sort of muffled. But we all had our headlamps on, and we all fanned out, and then you hear a voice, "It's over here." And we all gather over there, and then start walking off, and then get lost again. Some fan out, you know, there's about 100 yards between us. "It's over here." And little by little, we picked our way across about a half a mile of rock and eventually found the trail and got to the top. The reason I mention that story is the men who have stepped forward to be our monthly givers, who've said, "I'm gonna support Illumin every month with X amount, you know, for the duration." We have 73 of those men. And right now, those 73 produce almost a quarter of our income. Those funds are so important because when we hire somebody, it's usually not for a one-off thing. It's usually in an ongoing way, but we have to have a way to know that those funds are coming in order to sustain their work into the future. So my invitation is, those of us who are already these monthly givers, thank you for having your headlamps on. You are part of that group that helps us find our way one at a time, gathering together. You are the headlamps, 73. My invitation, brothers, let's make that 73 into 150. Let's have 150 monthly givers by the end of this year. So if you're giving right now, thank you for that. Thank you very much. If you're not a monthly giver, please consider that. And if it's $1 a month, that's fine. Just sign up. $5, you can decide whatever amount works for you. Go onto the website. There's Illumin, support, donate, bam, you're in. In fact, Brad put it already in the chat right there. So when you do that, maybe we'll call this the headlamp fund. I don't know, you know, I'm just thinking of it, but that's its effect, brothers. And that's just what I want to put forward to you, because the value of those committed funds coming in makes an enormous difference for the ability for us to extend our message to the men who have yet to receive it, and for those of us among us who are on that path, so we can support each other on this journey. So I hope that, look for that and sign up. By the end of the year, let's get to that 150, okay? And I can assure you, it's going to make a huge difference in the capacity for us to move ahead. So thanks very much for that, and for bearing with me in these couple of different stories and speaking about money and, you know, finding its rightful place in the work that we do. And at this point, I will turn it over to Jim, who will be guiding us in a conversation with Belden and Richard. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Wonderful.
Thank you very much, Steve. So am I to understand that I'm supposed to talk about sex and power? Is that what you're aiming? So, dear brothers, we welcome you to this conversation around the topics that we're exploring this weekend, and that is grief and connection. So please gather close in a spiritual reality as we listen to two of our wise elders who definitely have been walking through the valley of grief. So Richard and Belden, thank you very much for agreeing to this conversation, this opportunity to be able to partake of the brotherhood, thanks to the work of many men behind the scenes, literally, figuratively, to be able to make this happen. So let's dive right in. One of the questions that has come up for these men today, and certainly has been in our hearts the last 19 months, is how have you grieved your own losses last 19 months? How have you grieved your own losses in the last 19 months? This could be personal, relational, whatever level you like.
You want to go first, Belden? For me, it doesn't matter.
Go ahead if you're ready, Richard. Thank you.
Well, I don't think I have, to be perfectly honest. Like all of my life, I teach other people how to do it better than I do it myself. I mean, clearly the contemplative mind has been key to whatever I have been able to hold, forgive, accept, grieve over. I thank God many times that we made grief work such an important part of the MROP that a whole day was named after it. That was not mistaken. I do feel the amount of people I meet who are in deep undertow sadness or depression is overwhelming, really overwhelming. I go so far as to say we're a culture, I think a whole culture in major decline. And we all know this unconsciously. So in answer to your question, if I'm dealing with it at all, it's largely in my unconscious. Consciously, I keep going about my merry work, whatever it means, but there's a sadness, a global sadness that I pull along behind me that I know you do too. And maybe we all, we can do is give one another permission to feel it. That's all that comes to mind. I don't think that was a very direct answer.
I'll
Well-
come back at you, Richard. Belden.
Yeah, it's been a horrendous year and a half or more for me, for our family. Back in January of last year, our son, John, he was 40 at the time, was diagnosed with leukemia, a very sneaky, deadly kind. He was on chemo for months. He seemed to recover. They declared him cancer-free in August. He rang the bell, ironically, at the hospital. 2 months later, the cancer came back and he was dead within a week. So combined with surgeries of my own and a increasing awareness of old age really catching up with me now. Richard and I, by the way, are born the same year. I think, Richard, you're a couple of months ahead of me.
Months ahead of you.
1943, yeah.
Yes.
But between COVID, our deep concerns over the environment, over women and people of color in our culture, and John's leaving his lovely wife and 5-year-old daughter, our only grandchild. It's been overwhelming. And today's taken its toll on me. It's been beautiful. That session that John Bell led this morning and this afternoon, I was in a session with men facing suicide, their son's suicide, their father's suicide. We are all hurting, but it's been literally a dark night of the soul for me, a radical challenge of faith, shaking me to the roots.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Belden. If I could just follow what you just said, you've kind of answered the next question, and that is, how has grief changed your theology? We speak about a God who's relational, and yet we obviously all struggle with how do we get to that place where there really is authentic relationship and not just a God up there and me down here. But how has it changed your theology?
Yeah, that's a question that touches the bone. It's interesting when you're going through chaos, when you're in the depths, old theologies rise up often.
Yeah.
And so that old theology of my fundamentalist past, of a omnipotent God who chooses who he will allow to live and who he'll kill, that was tempted to rise within me again. And my needing to deal with that. When my father took his life when I was 13, I knew at the time that it was punishment. In fact, I said to my mother on the way home from the hospital, after we recognized him and he was declared dead, I said to her, God took my daddy because I was a bad boy.
Oh,
That sense of a punishing God that I was tempted to come back to again over this last year, and a real crisis of faith, having to give up radically any sense of an omnipotent, all-powerful God who maybe pulls strings for his favorites, but my son wasn't one of the favorites. And then finding God again only in the cross, in weakness and vulnerability. Not a God who chooses to let my son die, but a God who holds me to her chest, choking back her tears. That's the only God that I could find and was able to find again through the aid of some wonderful Illuman men in a Vision Quest experience out west this summer.
Yeah.
But it's been hard.
Yeah.
And God has been at the core of it.
Yeah. Well, Belden, I think you've named something that all of us men especially are deathly afraid of, and that is to come to that place of complete surrender. I mean, I can feel the tears in the back of my eyes. The sense of vulnerability where you just lay it all out there, where you experience the limitations of being a creature, of being a man, of being human. Richard, how about for you? Have you ever been in that place where you just feel like there's no other way out other than just total and complete surrender?
Well, I answered your first question. I'll get to this. It's affected my theology in terms of just recognizing how pretentious and silly most of my theologizing has been. It just, that when it comes down to it, everybody's dealing with their own life of suffering, humiliation, failure. And, any highbrow talking about things just is not meaningful to their soul. Yeah, I'm mirroring, Belden, what you just said about the cross. That the cross is not a theology anymore, but a daily lifting up, Now, I'm in early dementia, Jim. What was this? What was the second one?
I said, in your own life, where have you been, in a sense, forced or invited to just complete surrender?
Well, maybe I'm being led into it right now. I always tell people I never faced one big dark night of the soul as much as just in my 40s, 50s, 60s, just trying to live without becoming cynical by the absurdity of it all, the stupidity of it all. I think we're not called to forgive individuals as much as we're called to forgive reality for being so damn stupid. I mean, why did God create this kind of world? And yet, as I say that, I promise you, unless I have no self-knowledge, I don't think I'm cynical now. I'm seeing it with a clarity that I don't think I had earlier in life. So it's there, but it no longer, with even greater darkness, but it no longer has power to control me and, make me a depressed person. Maybe it should, but I'm okay, despite the little bouts with darkness for really the last 40 years of my life, I think. But no biggie. God couldn't risk giving me any heroic story to tell. I would have told it probably. I hope that's an answer.
Yes, thank you, Richard. Belden, how do you maintain the integrity of who you are, while at the same time remain flexible enough to be able to do what you just described, to allow the grief to move to a new place of theology or a new place of understanding of who you are?
Oh, I don't know how much integrity I maintain. We had our first and only memorial service for John a little over a week ago on the first anniversary of his death. And I was amazed. There were over 200 people there who loved him out of so many different contexts. All of his AA brothers and sisters, swim team members that he'd coached for years, union carpenters he worked with, people in the community in all kinds of ways, black and white, gay and straight, old and young. And it just struck me that my son had been a touch point for so many people, diverse people coming together. They all loved him. I was taken last week by what Byron said about the difference between being inclusive and belonging in terms of our Illuman work. And it strikes me that being inclusive is kind of like the largesse of people who are on the inside, and they grant the kindness of allowing others in. They're doorkeepers and they open the door for others. On the other hand, those who know that belonging is what matters, that everyone already belongs. Nobody has to be let into the door by those who are already there. We are all already there. And that deep sense of, that's what I see as integrity. And I saw it in my son. And I saw it in those who came to honor him last week. And you know that your children become your teachers often, if you're lucky. And so I want to live into what I saw in my son and what those people who were there at his memorial service saw in him last week.
Yeah, thank you, Belden. Well, Richard, I'm sure you've been informed of this, but the RIDE Council has been changed now to be calling the Council of Radical Belonging. And
Good.
yeah, so it really fulfills what Belden was just leaning into.
Yes.
Beyond the insight, which truly leans in the wisdom tradition, is that's beyond inclusivity. It's the whole idea of celebrating, respecting, honoring, and responding to, not just one of those, but all of them. The interconnectedness of all beings, of all reality. I know it's one of your favorite topics about everything belonging. So the concept is that really looking into the eyes of racism and naming our own struggle with racism, sexual orientation, othering, even in terms of the planet. Some of the native peoples speak about that we white men tend to walk on the earth rather than walking with the earth. So this is a whole area that's many of the men are interested that you might want to address, both of you. That is, for you individually, how are you wrestling with this radical belonging, this invitation by Holy Mother Nature, by the Creator, to step into a whole nother way of viewing yourself in relationship to the bigger picture? Richard, why don't we start with you?
You know, I tend to see everything, first of all, through the lens of theology, forgive me. But I get very angry and disappointed at organized religion, how it's like instead of announcing the radical belonging that I'm so happy you're speaking of, that our native peoples experienced apparently just walking through the forest. We spent so much of our preaching and teaching reminding people of how unworthy they were, how they didn't belong, and it was just the opposite of the good news. And now we're trying to dig our way out of this hole. And it is a hole for just the vast amount of people. They don't feel like they belong at all. Now, I believe in telling the story that we try to do in initiation. We're trying to announce a belonging at such an ontological, forgive the big word, metaphysical, universal level that no one can play with it anymore. But we didn't do that. So, I mean, Christian record on racism is deplorable. It really is. That we didn't show a much higher level of consciousness than anybody else. We created minor little rituals, we call them sacraments, by which people could feel they belonged, but they never really did, I don't think, or they wouldn't be so alienated now. So I'm very happy that you didn't just change the word, but I think you've evolved into a second tier consciousness, to speak of spiral dynamics, where you can understand why we made all these mistakes, even though you can't go back there yourself. But you have sympathy for all sentient beings, as the Buddhists say. And I think that's what we have to offer, because there's a lot in the cancel culture that thinks it can go back and shame people and blame people and antagonize people. And I hope our message is beyond that. It's like, I know all the shit. I know more shit than you do, but that's not the question. So I think we got to hold on to that, or we're going to get pulled into lesser agendas, smaller stories than the universal story.
Okay. Oh. St. Augustine, as you know, speaks about layers of ongoing conversion. It's not limited just to the intellectual. And it feels to me like we're at this first level. We're finally admitting something needs to change, moving from inclusivity to belonging. But if we truly are Illumined men transforming men, it means that we're going to go deeper into that invitation of how to be able to, for example, transform our emotional life in regards to this, transform our relational life in regards to the people that represent these different layers of reality of creation. Belden, would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, I'm aware that I have to make it personal continually.
That's your gift. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, the idea that's just written into me as a white American male is that I'm able to exercise a gracious inclusivity if I choose to, and that I inadvertently, unconsciously, it's part of the bones of my enculturation that I exercise a one-upness, a power with respect to people of color and women, and that calls me to deal with my whiteness, to be aware of my whiteness. The first time I realized I was white, and I think that's a really important awareness for every one of us, it was 1965. I was on the steps of the First Baptist Church in Tallahassee, Florida. I was in college there at Florida State University. And going up the steps, a young black man was ahead of me. And as he stepped up, 3 or 4 big deacons stepped out, white men, and said, what do you think you're doing? And he said he wanted to come to church. And they said, you have a church of your own you can go to. And, you know, this idealistic young man that I stepped in and said, why can't he come? And they looked at me and they told me to mind my own business. And it was in that moment I saw white power. I saw in the faces and the bodies of these huge white men, they had power. And the young black man walked away. I'm ashamed to say I walked into church. I sat there sitting through the whole service, stewing over my awareness of who I was, what I represented, what I had to deal with in me. And it struck me again. I've been the last couple of nights watching a new series on Apple TV called The Morning Show with Jennifer Aniston and what's her name? She's wonderful. These 2 great actresses. And it's all about the Me Too movement and about how men in a corporate setting there can use women, feel entitled, use their bodies as they choose, and out of a sense of innate power and entitlement that is theirs. And so one of the great things we have to do is to call ourselves on our involvement in the culture and our in being enculturated ourselves in all of these things.
Oh, thank you, Bill.
Yeah.
To me, this is another layer of grief, you know, a layer of realization of, oh my God, what have I done?
Yeah.
What have I not done? What have we done? And to begin to realize that we have to step down and de-arm ourselves and come to that place of vulnerability. I think this is where we as aluminum men can really help the situation by listening to each other's stories. The power of the story is phenomenal, but it can also get in the way. Speaking as a mythologist, one of the things I've learned about the field of mythology is that mythology is the place where stories are told and passed on if it speaks to the whole people. The story dies if it does not speak to the whole people. And that's how myth is born, is it's born from the hearts of many. So even though we may feel like we're a small organization, the story that we're trying to tell now is large enough to catch fire in our own hearts and begin to spread. Indeed, a new myth can be born. Richard, you have a wonderful diagram that you've used for many years. Perhaps you might want to speak to that from that.
Yes, okay. I won't take long. I learned this originally from Joseph Chilton Pierce, although I've added to it. He said we all, to live in wholeness and health, have to live inside the truly cosmic egg. And that was his name for this. But he had my story, the small psychological self with its wounds and its agendas, our story that I'm an American, I'm a Catholic, I'm a white man, whatever it might be, have to be contained and relativized by the story. Now, what I added in my latest small book was other stories. And I think that's what's happening right now, that the ability to make our story, whatever your group was, dominant, central, all important, is being radically relativized by the honoring of other people's stories. In the religious world, the political world, the gender world, and this is just shaking people to the core. As Joseph Chilton Pierce predicted, it's cracking the cosmic egg. Now, here's the unique thing, our opportunity. I think we have in our work, at least as regards the rites of passage, that I believe the unique entranceway, gateway of the MROP is to presume that we're trying to give men an experience of the story, which has to include my story, but it doesn't stop there or get trapped there, which has to include our story, but it doesn't stop there in mean green, as spiral dynamics calls it, or justifying my race, my nationality, my gender, and the encounter with other stories is making the cosmic egg much more difficult to put together. And yet I believe without it, thanks for putting the diagram up, I don't think we have the word I'm going to use is humility. I don't think religion has the proper humility. Certainly Americanism, whatever that means, does not have the proper humility, because we all centralize my story and our story. And inside of that, you can't even hear the story, much less other people's stories. So I offer you that, those of you who've probably forgotten it. It was in my early book, Hope Against Darkness. But I didn't yet have that third dome of meaning, other stories. And they've really taken over the scene, and as they have to. George Floyd forced us to recognize that there's a whole history of America that I know nothing about, that this can happen. So it's good news that the cosmic egg has grown bigger, but it's bad news for our time, because we need elders now like never before. People who hold on to what's good about order, honor necessary disorder, the breaking of the rules that we put in place, and that leading us to what I call reorder. That's much of the story in all of the world religions. It's the hero's journey in Joseph Campbell that we use so much in our early years. So the same themes keep coming full circle. But thank you for letting me say it. I hope I didn't take too long.
No, that's good, Richard. Well, let me
let go of the story, but hold it in a humble way. You understand?
Yeah.
The patterns that are always true. I don't care if you're Presbyterian or Buddhist or Black African native religion. The story of transformation of the soul is the same. And that's what we've got to tell. And refuse the attempt of so many people to pull us back in to political correctness, to pull us back into therapy, even though, I'll stop with this, the irony is that the therapy happens at an amazing level, and the kind of correctness emerges without us trying. So take it for what it's worth. A whole issue of wanting our little periodical. The next issue is going to be, I think this is the cover of it.
Yeah. Thank you. Belden, in the face of what Richard's presented and against the template of your own shared story, how in the world, in the face of things falling apart in our present world, how in the world do we speak about or offer good news? You had talked about, your granddaughter asking questions, and others asking you questions about where do we go from here? It's another way of saying, what do you say to our young generation now about good news?
Yeah. Ellie came to Grammy and me. Patricia, my wife, is Grammy. I'm Babu, Swahili word for grandfather. And it's been a couple months now. She said, Babu, what if mommy should die like daddy did? Are you going to die, Babu? When are you going to die? And, how do you answer the questions like that of a 5-year-old? And so what I try to do is say, should I die? I'll be where daddy is, and daddy's right now there in your heart, and he's just going to scoot over, and I'm going to be there too. And then she and I will play. I shared with some of the guys in the group earlier today that one of the big greatest points of healing for me, and maybe Ellie too, in this last year or so, has she loves to play Tickle Monster. It's her way of dealing with monsters, the monster of threat, of death, of loss of control, totally of chaos. And when we play Tickle Monster, I will lie on the floor. She'll be up on the couch or on the bed. And I will put my fingers up, and I'm the monster, and I'll growl, and I'm trying to grab her. And she loves to be grabbed. She puts her foot over to she wants me to grab her, and then I pull her down and I hug her and I tickle her, her under her feet and in her ribs and under her neck, under her arms and so forth. And she loves it. This idea of being grabbed by a monster turning into being held by a grandpa is what more wonderful transformation can you imagine? And so to invite us to recognize that in our stepping down, I love your using that term earlier, that as we step down and we're forced to step down in terms of all the things falling apart around us, that God stepped down too in the revelation of the earth and its all of its fragility and beauty, and in the cross. And so that invitation to not having to exercise power, not being into control, that there is a wonderful freedom in that. And as we enter into that freedom and can start over, not from the top, but working from below, as God herself does, that's the key for us.
Yeah.
Hope.
Oh, well said.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It seems to me that part of, maybe a major part of why grief is so painful is we suffer from a lack of imagination, meaning we don't know what's on the other side. There's a lovely end of David White's poem, The Journey, where he says, sometimes with the bones of the black sticks left when the fire has gone out, someone has written something new in the ashes of your life. You are not leaving. Even as the light fades quickly, you are arriving. Richard, as you reflect upon your life and your own struggle with your aging process, diminishment of health, what do you think you're arriving at? Where is your contemplation leading you?
I don't know if this is an answer, but the phrase that comes to mind is from T.S. Eliot in the Four Quartets. Lord, teach us to care and not to care. It's amazing how much I don't care about anymore. I hardly read books. People send me 3 or 4 a day. Many of them, I'm sure, masterpieces. I can just sit here under the cottonwoods behind my house, just gazing for an hour without trying, without even trying, just gazing. And and that is very satisfying. So I certainly feel God is leading me to a radical simplicity about what matters and what's real and what lasts. And I'm sure Belden would say the same. At our age, it's astounding to me how many people I knew who are now dead,
Yeah.
who were young heroes when I was young. Jerry Steinmetz, the pastor here at the parish, died last week. He was born in 43 too. So when they start dying in your same age group, you know you're in line. But I care about very few things, and it allows me not to care about loads of things. Yeah. Lord, teach us to care and not to care at the same time. That's sort of where I am right now.
Okay. Thank you. Belden, how about for you?
I guess something really profound happened this summer there near Ghost Ranch in this vision quest that I knew I had to undertake in order to cope with the grieving over John. And what came to me is that I'm not alone, and that everything, despite all the chaos, is being held. I had several dramatic experiences there in the 4 days that I was alone up on the top of a canyon, looking over to Orphan Mesa in the distance. And a deep sense of John coming for me, of seeing him in the rising sun on that red mesa across from me, Orphan Mesa. But the last night was maybe the most interesting. You know, the last night of your vision quest, that's when things are really supposed to happen. You wait for the great revelation that's coming. Well, nothing came. I just waited and waited and waited, and counting lightning strikes in the western sky, and finally decided, well, I'm just going to sit here the rest of the night and wait it out. I'm going to stay. And suddenly I thought of that last night of John's dying in the hospital with him. Patricia and I and Katie, his wife, we were there in the room with him. And he died at 3:00, the hour of the wolf. And we were exhausted by then. It'd been a horrendous day, and everyone was exhausted. We left. But I felt so badly about that. I did not want to leave. I didn't want to leave John's body there. I'm going to stay with him at least till dawn. I didn't want anybody coming in with a metal tray and taking him off to the morgue alone. And so I thought, you know, I'd always mourned that I had not stayed there with him. And I thought that last night, well, you know, maybe I can still do that. 10 months late, I can stand here by John. I can sit here by John through the night and be faithful. And I did. And then an hour or two later, this extraordinary experience of the moon rising behind me over the canyon wall, and the distant mesa lit up in a slate gray, white kind of pale light. And it was deathly, but it was beautiful. And I knew it was John across the room from me there, his body, reminding me that all will be well, that he is well, that I'm not alone, that everything is being held. I'll be okay. We all will be okay. Yeah. It's a profound gift.
Indeed. Thank you, Belden. Thank you. You know, almost 3 years ago, my 23-year-old niece Beth died from the effects of skin cancer.
Mm.
And it was a powerful unitive experience for the family on many levels. It's the first time anyone that young in our family tree had died that age. But I'll never forget one night, being the priest in the family, they called me to come and anoint her. The hospice care nurse had said that she was beginning to move towards the death rattle. So we all gathered, those who were in the area, and during the time of laying on of hands, I invited everybody to lay hands on her. And my sister-in-law, Beth's mother, had really been reached a point of anger, which was good.
Mhm.
Anger at God, you know, why,
Yeah.
and all that, which I'm sure you can identify with. And so that was in the back of my mind as I was praying. And then I had this image. Some might call it a vision, but it was very clear. As we were laying hands on her beloved body, I had this image of Jesus lying across her body at an angle, just weeping. And I was so moved by it. It's like I didn't want to open my eyes. But when it was time, I finished the rite and finished all the prayers. And then I pulled Kathy, her mother, aside, and I said, "You're not going to believe what I saw." I described the scene, and she looked right at me and says, "I saw the exact same thing." And it not only moved me, but I thought, what a beautiful affirmation. This mother who was just torn apart, just torn apart. It also reminded me of something that Richard had taught us many years ago, and that is, as we near the hour of leaving this dimension, it's like the veil parts. And indeed, she passed away 2 days later. It was such a powerful affirmation that we're invited to be able to belong to integrate, to recognize there are so many layers and levels and dimensions that are beyond our immediate senses, 5 senses, but to trust in that, to walk in that valley. So I know the two of you heard of the tremendous interest in the field of different psychologies of post-traumatic stress disorder. That it first came to us, that phrase, in regards to the military returning home from active duty and the effects it had on it. And then slowly other people came forward describing the conditions of their life, and they too were diagnosed with that. It's been very recently now, there is a new way of looking at trauma. It's called post-traumatic stress growth. What they discovered, which is very interesting, is that sometimes the same type of experience can be experienced by one person and it becomes a disorder, where another personality becomes a growth mechanism. And it depends upon the willingness and perhaps the ability to integrate the trauma into one's life. Not everyone, but psychologists are beginning to say that perhaps what's going on is an invitation for us to find meaning in the trauma. Meaning in the trauma. Because at some level, I know this sounds radical, but they say that trauma cannot be healed. At its best, it can only be accepted and integrated. Those who do that can move forward. Belden, could you speak to that? And then I'll turn it to Richard.
Yeah, thank you. That's beautiful. And the way, if there are people, and there are people who move into a post-traumatic stress growth, it's all kinds of different ways of doing that. I think in my experience, a moment of growth months back, I was talking with a dear brother I love in Illuman. We were Zooming together, and for the first time in relationship to John's death, I felt anger at God. And I said, "You goddamn son of a bitch. What the fuck are you thinking and taking my 41-year-old son?" And you know, that old theology acting up. And but it was a a wonderful thing to, I'm convinced, as the rabbis have always said, that if you don't have to save nice things to say to God. Whatever you got to say it. God wants to hear it. And there was a release, a freedom, an awareness that I did have anger to let go of. And then I asked him, my brother, I asked him at the end of our conversation if he would pray for us. And he began, "You goddamn son of a bitch." And I just broke into sobs. We both did. That breakthrough, that freedom of being able to move into God's love in whatever way is necessary for us. So yeah, I do believe in PTSD. Thank you.
Yeah.
I've never heard of that, but it's beautiful.
Yeah. Richard?
You know, I can't help but think that both Paul and Augustine, when they talked about sin, Paul, original sin, and Augustine, they were talking about a universal wounding. And that's the way it was taught. No one was exempt. Now, of course, we Catholics had to exempt Mary, but everybody else, everybody else was wounded. And, you know, now having worked with so many people, I just don't know a person who hasn't been wounded.
Yeah.
And often in major, major ways. And you read the history of the world. I watched that series on the history of China. Was it 6 parts? I mean, just century after century of massacre, war, death, starvation, torture, children seeing their parents killed right in front of them. This has been the story of humanity.
Yeah.
Is one big trauma. And even we rich, comfortable people in the developed America, once you get close to people, they always have their story, and the tears are often just as sincere, just as deep. So I think instead of calling sin a moral failure, I think it's the absurdity of the human situation. I talk about that in my book on evil. And we all sooner or later have to face it. The whole damn thing is absurd. So I see why you have to resort, Belden, to what we used to call curse words, 4-letter words. It's just, what else is going to explain this shitty situation that we all sooner or later find ourselves in.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you try to exempt yourself from it, you very often create an even worse by your own rigidity and righteousness and the people you've excluded from your life or your family or your group. Well, all I'm saying, and you both said it well already, I think we all have post-traumatic stress disorder, but it's more than stress. It's why is the world shaped the way it is?
Yeah. It seems to me that if we're not willing to do our grief work authentically, that our grief can become very self-centered. It can protect me, or at least it seems to protect me from going deeper in relationships, deeper in trust, deeper, as you alluded to, Belden, certainly a faith context. I think one of the signs, if I understand, of authentic grief work is that as you come through it, you find yourself growing in compassion, find yourself growing in gratitude. Those are the two, if you will, proofs or fruits that this grief work has enlarged me, has deepened me, has made me, if you will, more human. Could you speak to that, Belden?
Yeah. this time, this last year and a half, I've written about the saints in some of my work. They've become so profoundly important for me. And one of the most important is St. Patrick, because of John. It was the day after St. Patrick's Day in 2008 that John came to me and said, "Dad, I reached rock bottom last night. Will you go with me to an AA meeting?" And Patrick was always important for both of us. I knew he had been there for John the night before. And so this last March 17th, thinking about Patrick, and I was pissed with him, to be honest, angry that he'd failed us. And yet, you know how the saints talk to you like trees sometimes, the way grandfather does for me, that tree apart across the street in the park. I heard Patrick say as clear as day, Belden, I couldn't save his life, but I did help to save his soul. Mm. And to realize that those 13 last years of his life, when he had gotten things in order and married, done great work, had this beautiful daughter that he loved to pieces, that Patrick's gift of sobriety was one of the most wonderful things that I could ever have hoped for. And John could have died 13 years ago without ever having entered into that wholeness on the other side of profound mistakes, loss, sin, grief.
Oh,
I don't know if that answers your question. It's pretty obvious. I'm pretty fragile,
yeah.
pretty vulnerable after the end of this day.
Yeah, I hear
Sorry.
you. Yeah, thank you for being here, Belden. We certainly know that and we honor that. The courage is just breathtaking. Thank you. Richard, how about for you? Do you experience, as you've come out of your different losses, various shapes and forms, you find yourself with a deeper compassion for others or a deeper sense of gratitude for what is?
I think so. I hope so. I know there's always a sense of you can't control it. And in this lack of control, inability to control, there's a certain kind of what I can only call sweetness.
Yeah.
Sweetness. That you give it up. Okay, that game's over. And when you stop playing that game, the heart is softened. The mind doesn't have its rigidities. Grief, as we even talked about when we did the MROP, is held in the body more than the mind, in the muscle memory. And there, I think, is where compassion is also held. You still have your hurts that you repeat to yourself in your mind, but the mind loses its power in grief.
Yeah.
Carried for a while,
Yeah.
a long while, very often.
Yeah. Thank you. During this COVID-19 time, during the last 19 months, many of us men have talked about missing each other, especially in the physical sense. The hugs, the embraces, the smell of each other, shoulder to shoulder, all of it, just being together. How have you, the two of you, reached out to connect with other people? How have you made this work of connecting work for you at some level?
I was in Albuquerque, what was it, early August, and walked over to see Richard. He just welcomed me right in, and I met Opie for the first time. I'd not met Opie.
There he is, Opie. You're being talked about, Opie.
Yeah, I've got a Joey, who is my golden retriever. He adopted us a year ago almost. And so it's curious how our dogs are sometimes our best teachers. But just checking in and not staying very long, but seeing Richard, it was, I know a lot of guys have had a man crush on Richard through the years, and I understand it completely. Nobody's been a teacher more important to me than you, Richard, for the last 20 years.
Oh, God.
And men are crazy about Richard, and they come to me, Richard personally, and I say, oh yeah, I've
Tell
been
them how
kissed.
disappointed they'll be.
I've been kissed by his dog, Venus licking me in the face. And now I can say, after this summer, I've been nipped by Richard's pup. Opie is very jealous. If you go to hug Richard,
Oh, yeah.
he'll nip at your heels.
He'll come in between. Yeah, it's true.
So that little connection was beautiful.
Yeah. So that's a good point. Is that sometimes all it takes is a single connection to feed the soul, if only for a time.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Richard, how about for you? How have you connected?
Of course, I had my training living here in my little quasi hermitage. So to isolate wasn't very hard for me. But what it allowed me to do, the bishop forbade priests my age to even have mass. So except with my family a few weeks ago in Kansas, that's the only mass I've had in a year and a half.
Mhm.
So I got more separated from people, the ordinary folks. But what it's allowed me to do is walk in this parking lot, ugly yard where I live and meet the workers over here with Mike Bennett and the people here at the parish a lot more than I ever did. Just the people who come to my door. So it was a different kind of audience than these adoring fans, I had nothing to live up to. It was just, they know I live here. I've lived here 22 years now, and the whole neighborhood sort of knows me, but they don't know me.
Yeah.
And so to have the time for more developed conversations was just so dear. It's still going on. There were 4 of them here in my yard today. I know they're just hanging out, hoping I'll open the door.
Yeah.
And so nothing profound, except you realize how much I need human contact, or I lose my sanity. I lose my feet on the ground with all my theologizing about everything. Thanks for asking, Jim.
You're welcome. At this point in your life, for both of you, do you tell your story differently? Do you see the bigger picture now? Do you find yourself, as you were alluding to earlier, Richard, not getting caught up in the little details, like say earlier mistakes or perceptions? Find yourself telling the story in a way that the folks after you can be enriched, can be enlivened, if we can use that word, or invited into their own story even more, much like the scripture writers and the myth makers of old. Belden, let's start with you.
How do I tell my story differently? I think, I don't want to sound modest here, but I used to tell my story as if it were something about me. And that triumphs I had made over difficulties, tragic mistakes I'd made in my life that somehow had been redeemed. I guess I see my story, and I would like to tell it more as maybe I'm doing tonight, as not something I've been at the heart of, but that that the hands of God have been there all along, and that I'm growing some little facility at naming what has been most important all my life. You know, we say that we are men transforming men through a power greater than ourselves, and I guess I'd like to think I'm moving from we are men transforming men to emphasizing that power greater than ourselves is not anything I've accomplished so much as what's been done to me.
Yeah. Oh, well said. Richard, how about for you?
You know, in late Franciscan studies, we've done critical analysis of Francis's writings, sort of like we've done with the Gospels, you know, critical theory of, did this really say this or whatever. And one of the most amazing discoveries is Francis actually said, "Thank God that you're not good." and we were so convinced it was wrong that we erased the not. Thank God that you're good. What a bunch of shit to have to live up to, you know. And then he goes farther. He says, and for not being, thank God for not being thought good. And as you all know, I have plenty of enemies, plenty of people calling me heretic, and the way I can frame it now is that's really okay. I don't base my, in whatever self-esteem I have, on that I'm a good person or that people think well of me. Yeah, some do, but it might just be that I've been able to fool them better than others, you know. But I'm amazed at that line. Thank God that you are not good.
Yeah.
I love that. I've discovered a new Sufi mystic recently, Ibn Abbad of Ronda in southern Spain. He was a mystic in the 14th century, contemporary of Julian. And he echoes this. He says that God doesn't want us to be good. Just like Julian said, you know, sin is necessary.
Yes.
That Ibn Abbad says, Allah says, you know, who would I have to forgive? How could I exercise my need to forgive if my people didn't mess up?
Yeah.
That God needs us to mess up in order to practice God's love. That's beautiful. And I know it's what you've been teaching us for years, Richard.
But it's truer than ever in my life.
Yeah.
When you don't waste any sweat over what do people think of me and am I good? It's just, who cares anymore?
Yeah.
Because so many of the people who think I'm so wonderful, they don't know the real story. And people who think I'm terrible don't know the real story either. So why put too much credence into either one of them, you know?
Yeah. Recently, I was going through some old journals of mine, and I was stunned. These are really old, back when I was in my 20s. And I thought, oh my God, I'm still dealing with the same shit.
It's true.
So as I answer my own question, I realized that they're kind of like currents in the ocean of my life. They come back with different shapes and forms or through different relationships, but they're part of my own psychic makeup. And to tell the story of my life is to tell it in a much broader way, a way that I would hope is more liberating, more forgiving, more connecting for myself and for others. But brothers, thank you very much for your time. So as we've tried to, in our conversation, focus on very simply but clearly that grief work at its core is all about releasing the divine seed within us, releasing the energy, the force of life within us, so that we can truly be present to others. And connecting is all about reclaiming the truth that we do belong to each other, that we belong in every way you can think of, that there's meant to be no real, in the end, no real boundaries in a way that would separate us from that reality, that we are all divinized by this thing called divine love, that it's just electrifying. So Richard, any last words you'd like to share before we move to a blessing?
You've given me so many chances in the last hour. I don't think there's anything waiting to be said, but thank you. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Belden, how about you? Any last words?
You know, I was after Oracle 1 this summer, and our Death Lodge grieving the end of, in one respect, our Illuman work. Last week with Oracle 2, I had a deep sense of encouragement that we really are, as a body, facing the signs of the times, what is demanded of us. It's as if we're like where the church was in the beginning of Vatican II, really invited to ask, how wide can we get? How deep can we get? What can we become more than we are? And so I'm just so honored to have been molded and influenced by this incredible body of men that we all are.
Oh,
Thank you, Belden.
thank you, Belden.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Well, Richard and Belden, thank you very much for opening your heart, your lives to us men and in this conversation, and wish you many blessings. So if you wouldn't mind sticking around for this final blessing. So brothers, I'd like to invite you for this blessing to hold at least one other man in your heart that you want to extend this blessing to. You certainly can hold many other men, but try and make it as specific as you can. Recognize that we both bless and are a blessing. O loving Creator, we thank you that you are above all love, a love that's strange, mysterious, beyond us, sometimes painful, deep. We ask you with our whole being that your blessing this night may extend to each one of us and beyond us, that you might grant us the deep awareness and experience of a radical belonging beyond inclusivity, to be able to embrace all aspects of our life, good, the bad, the ugly, the indifferent, the known and unknown. Help us not only realize, but to experience the deeper connection of what it means to be human, what it means to be a part of your holy creation. You allow us both to bend down in worship and to stand up in dignity, to share in your glory, speak your truth, to live our lives with authenticity, dignity, and a deep sense of knowing what it means to be your beloved sons. We ask this in all of your holy names. Aho. So
Thank
brothers, we're going to send you off now, depending upon which time zone you're in, to the Dream Weaver. We want to give you a couple of prompts. First prompt is, what has been stirred up for you that you would want to have some sort of response, guidance, direction? What has been stirred up for you this day that you'd want some direction, some affirmation, some guidance. You present that to the Dreamweaver before you go to sleep tonight. Second prompt is, what area of your life are you being invited to integrate more fully? What area of your life are you being invited to integrate more fully? It could be a relationship with someone living or dead. It could be a part of you that you have a hard time accepting. But where area of your life are you being invited to integrate more deeply? So just a little quick ideas about how to incubate your dream. How to incubate, that means to prepare yourself for it. Make sure that when you get ready to go to bed, that you see this as a ritualizing behavior that's inviting you to see the sacredness in what you're doing. So you might want to begin by preparing your body, for example, taking a shower or a bath, or as you disrobe, putting your body in a new type of clothing as a way of expecting the guest of the Dreamweaver. You might want to begin with a very simple prayer. Into your hands I commend this night. The night is where things begin to grow in helpful ways. You also will find it helpful if you can say this at least 3 times with great passion. I will remember my dreams this night. I remember my dreams this night. Actually, it's even better to say, put it in the present, I am remembering, because the brain responds to that type of message. The last thing I would say about your dreams is when you awake, even if it's in the middle of the night, I know this is literally a pain in the butt, but do your best to write it down, even if it's a snippet, even if you have to run to the toilet, write down a line, because the light of day is the robber of dreams. And you'll be surprised, even just writing a quick memory with the dream, how it will bring it back to you. If you at all possible can stay in bed when you wake up, go back in the dream, and you can do what they call active imagination. Now that you're awake, as you go back in the dream, how do you want the dream to continue in your day? Because that way your conscious life and your unconscious life are communicating together. So with the theme of this conference, this is very appropriate. The whole idea of letting go, releasing, and reconnecting. You're doing that consciously and unconsciously. So many blessings to you, brothers. Thank you for your participation. You're here not only for yourself, you're here for each of us. Aho.
Oh.
Shalom.